Tonight I'm giving you a special presentation of the for the 80th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. 80 years, 80 years, and that 80th anniversary is basically kicking off for less than 5 hours from now. Battle of Normandy. We had over 14,000 Canadians taking part in this. The Battle of Normandy and the landings of June 6th, through the encirclement of the German army at Falaise on 21st of August, was one of the pivotal events of the Second World War, and the scene of some of Canada's greatest feats of arms. Overall, the Allied operation had over 150,000, roughly 154,000 soldiers, sailors, and airmen taking part. So 150,000 troops, Allied troops, landed alone. They either landed or parachuted into the invasion area on D-Day, and that's including 14,000 Canadians. Overall, the Royal Canadian Navy contributed about 124 vessels and 10,000 sailors, and the Royal Canadian Air Force contributed 39 squadrons to the operation. Total Allied casualties on D-Day reached more than 10,000, including 1,096 Canadians, of whom 381 were killed in action. By the end of the Battle of Normandy, the Allies had suffered some 209,000 casualties, including more than 18,700 Canadians. Over 5,000 Canadian soldiers died. Our beach was Juno. You can see here Utah, Omaha, American, Gold, British, Juno, and Juno was ours. Gold and Sword were British. Juno, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, 5,000 assault troops, 2,500 in initial waves. That is what constituted some of our greatest memories of the Second World War. So Normandy, Canadians had been fighting in this war, of course. And so basically, this is a special presentation because it is the 80th anniversary. And this is not directly part of the World War II timeline of presentations that I do, although it's a special one. It is directly connected. Canada had been part of this war, of course, since September 10th, 1939. Since then, we have produced many thousands of tanks, many thousands of soldiers, and the contributing force of 14,000 Canadians into the Normandy campaign would prove extremely effective. Units like our own New Brunswick North Shore Regiment took part in this battle, among others. So that's the unit in New Brunswick. We're part of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. This is important to remember. The North Shore that day lost some 34 soldiers in that battle and had some around 96 injured. This is part of this amazing campaign that took all through much of the summer and into June and July, and did not end until the 21st of August. June 6, 1944, is the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany, as from what we call, at least from our perspective, on the Western Front. This is the penetration of the Atlantic Wall and the beginning of the liberation of France. So in about a half hour, midnight, will mark the beginning of the 80th anniversary. You have free fighting French. Of course, you have Brits, Canadians, Belgians, Czechs, Dutch, Norwegians, Greeks, Free French, Americans, Australian, New Zealand, Poles, and Danes, all fighting together. 14,000 Canadians, plus 450 plus parachuted into Normandy to fight in behind enemy lines. The Brits had paratroopers that landed behind the lines from Gold and Sword Beaches. 5,000 plus Canadians in the Battle of Normandy would not come back. Before Allied troops could land, the Allies had done a major bombing campaign against heavy gun positions and bunkers along the Normandy coast and along the Atlantic Wall coast, all along the lines. That heavy bombing campaign was pivotal for Allied soldiers to be able to land, to soften up the ground, to take out heavy positions, and keep the Germans pinned down. And this certainly was a campaign that involved many air wings. So the preparations in the beginning of 1944, they started early 1944 off for Operation Overlord, which would be the landings at D-Day, and they were well underway. Even from 1943, they had begun planning. But Allied planners sought to identify suitable objectives for the heavy bomber forces. These included the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe in the west, particularly its fighter aircraft, the rail transport network along which German reinforcements would have to pass, and the enemy's defenses on the shores of Fortress Europe. It was surmised that later on, with the troops ashore, the bombers could be called upon by army commanders for use against battlefield objectives. None of this found favor with Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, the man in charge of the RAF Bomber Command. Harris had his own views on what his bombers should be doing, namely area attacks on German industrial cities, which is true, but this here allowed did a heck of a lot of damage to ground targets, to fortifications along the Atlantic Wall, which allowed for a steady stream of firepower from sea as well as landing force on D-Day. So this has been his mantra. I mean, he wanted to focus on area attacks since February 1942. The Americans already committed to precision daylight attacks against key German industries like U-boat pans, ball bearing and oil facilities, and were also hostile to diversion of effort. Although in their case, the Luftwaffe was already a key objective. It already was a key objective. But the heavy bombing was certainly needed and was used against Germans along the Atlantic Wall. So these series of bombardments on the coast of northern France were in order to destroy large numbers of German strategic target objectives. While the Atlantic Wall was still under construction along the English Channel, the Atlantic coast, radar stations, numerous fort and coastal artillery batteries could disrupt the Allied offensive if nothing was done to destroy these key points. Allied bombing in northern France caused considerably. The bombing increased considerably from autumn 43 onward to 44 in preparation for Operation Overlord. And the number of raids continued to raise until September 1944. These air operations were supposed to disorient the German forces with the destruction of military targets, but also of roads, railways, railway stations, industries, and port facilities, supported by sabotage actions carried out by the French resistance. The German communication network had to be deeply destroyed. So this battle, of course, for Canada alone, um, from the D-Day landings on June 6th through to August 21st at the Phillies Gap, is one of the pivotal points for Canada in the Second World War. I mean, soldiers, sailors, and airmen played critical roles in the Allied invasion of Normandy, also called, of course, with Operation Overlord. It being called this bloody campaign was to liberate Western Europe from Nazi occupation. So we definitely played a massive role. If you can consider 14,000 um, soldiers, that's more. That's a vast majority of what would be considered the combat arms of Canadian Army, of the Canadian Army today. In the Battle of Normandy, 18,700 Canadians were killed. In the English Channel alone is an armada of more than 6,900 ships, including 124 Canadian ships in total. 110 Canadian warships approached the coastline towards daybreak. Tom Gunning, an 18-year-old sailor on the frigate HMCS Cape Breton, was overwhelmed by the sight. It's almost impossible to describe the awesome power of it. Let's go, Canada. At Juneau, Allied landing craft once again struggled with rough seas, along with offshore shoals and enemy mines. Upon finally disembarking, Canadian soldiers were then cut down in droves by Germans firing from seaside houses and bunkers with MG-42s and rifles, Car 98 rifles. The first hour was particularly brutal, with a casualty rate approaching 50% of the landing assault teams, in which the North Shore was a part of that. In the confusion, an Allied tank inadvertently ran over some of the wounded, stopping only when a Canadian captain blew its track off with a grenade. Other Canadians lacked any tank support at all. After fighting their way off the beach, however, German resistance slowed immensely, and the march into the interior went quickly. In fact, the Canadians advanced further inland than either their American or British counterparts. Though they didn't quite meet their objectives of taking um, uh, Carpiquet, airport, they captured several towns and linked up with the British on adjacent Gold Beach. So Carpiquet airport wasn't taken initially, but then linked up with the Brits and then they continued forward. For Canadian troops, it was the 3rd Infantry Division, which held numerous units. And these men were brave. Not all of them survived. 7th Reconnaissance Regiment, 17th Duke of York's Royal Canadian Hussars, the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade, consisting of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, Regina Rifle Regiment, 1st Battalion Canadian Scottish Regiment, the 8th Infantry Brigade, Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, Regiment de la Chaudière, and the North Shore New Brunswick Regiment. 9th Infantry Brigade, Highland Light Infantry of Canada, Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders, North Nova Scotia Highlanders, and the Cameroon Highlanders of Canada, machine gun. For artillery, we had the 12th Field Regiment, 13th Field Regiment, 14th Field Regiment, 19th Field Regiment, 3rd Anti-Tank Regiment, 4th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment. And of course, we had the 2nd Armored Brigade, 6th Armored Regiment, 1st Hussars, 10th Armored Regiment, Fort Garry Horse, 27th Armored Regiment, Fusiliers de Sherbrooke from Quebec, and of course, the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, operated under the 6th British Airborne Division. Supporting units from the Corps of Royal Canadian Engineers, Royal Canadian Corps of Signals, Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps, Royal Canadian Army Service Corps, and Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps as well. These units were pivotal this day. For Sword Beach, around midnight, British airborne troops, along with a battalion of Canadians, dropped behind enemy lines to secure the invasion's eastern flank, just as the Americans were doing near Utah. Within minutes, they had taken hold of Pegasus Bridge over the Caen Canal and nearby Horsa Bridge over the Rhine, the River Oron. Other airborne troops destroyed bridges over the River Dives to prevent German reinforcements from arriving, and they also took out a key German artillery battery in a bloody firefight. The British then landed on Sword at 7:07:25 a.m., around the same time as at Gold, but before Juno. Although moderate fire greeted them, they soon secured beach exits with the help of the funnies. Moving inland, they connected with the airborne units, but faced relatively strong resistance in farmlands and villages. In the late afternoon counterattack, German forces made it all the way to the beach in one location, only to be turned back. The Allies would not be able to unite all 5 D-Day beaches until 6 days later on June 12th. So securing the beach exits with the funnies. The funnies were tank units. These unusual vehicles played an important role in D-Day landings. The failed Allied raid at Dieppe in 1942 really exposed how difficult it was to land vehicles and men during an amphibious invasion and to break through German coastal defenses. Specialized armor was needed to get across soft sand and shingle, um, and through beach obstacles. So they came up with what was called the swimming Shermans, and the Shermans basically would have a top that would inflate over them so that they could float in the water, and hopefully it wasn't going to sink, and that's what they did. So the Allies made efforts to develop this armored equipment for D-Day in early 43, what they call the 79th Armored Division under the command of Major General Sir Percy Hobart was given responsibility for developing equipment and tactics to perform specialized tasks in support of ground troops on and after D-Day. And so these are what we call Hobart's funnies, and these tanks are really interesting to look at. And this is what I'm talking about. This thing is pretty cool. The as you can see here, the canvas rises up so that it will fit like a boat, and the tank will float in the water as it goes to land. It's really cool. There's also, of course, there's crab tanks that would actually are meant to spin up and take out German mines, and like a flail mower. They call it's a flail tank, and these were used um, and as an attachment to clear mines as they're going up through. So getting to the North Shore Regiment, this is the North Shore Regiment, which is, of course, our proud New Brunswick North Shore. New Brunswick's North Shore Regiment landed at Nan Red Beach near St. Alban at 08:10. Assault engineers and DD tanks of C Squadron Fort Garry Horse accompanied the regiment. The 14th and 19th Field Regiments, Royal Canadian Artillery, fired a steady barrage onto the beaches with their 105 guns beginning at 07:39 and lasted for 30 minutes. B Company landed at St. Alban proper. In the village located on the highest point of land, there was an encased strongpoint housing a 50-millimeter gun. The strongpoint had survived the preliminary bombardment, and its defenders inflicted heavy casualties and destroyed several Sherman tanks. Once the LCAs landed and the troops headed across the 300 feet of beach to the cover of the beach wall, small arms fire buzzed everywhere. They used wire cutters and Bangalore torpedoes to blast their way forward and were at close quarters with the enemy. They were pinned down by mortar and machine gun fire. Snipers were also inflicting casualties. C and D companies landed after the first wave at 09:45 and moved into St. Aubin. Captain Bill Harvey of D Company described the action as they moved into the village. I moved up towards the road parallel with the beach and saw puffs of smoke coming from a pillbox. I got Sergeant Joe Burton to fire 2 hits on the pillbox. I moved along the street and found everything at a standstill since a German 75mm gun controlled the area. A dozen high explosive mortar bombs did the trick, and we cleared the gun position. But we were held up by snipers. Then our guns got into a fire position and disposed of the sniper controlled from the tower. Although a total of 14,000 Canadians stormed Juno Beach on D-Day, there were not more than 3,000 young Canadians in the first wave, all ranks. The initial assault was the responsibility of 4 regiments, with 2 additional companies supporting the flanks. North Shore Regiment on the left at St. Aubin, Nen Red Beach. Queen's Own Rifles in the center of Berniere's Nan White Beach. Regina Rifles at Conseil's Nan Green Beach. Royal Winnipeg Rifles on the western edge of Conseil's Mike Red and Mike Green Beaches. A company of the Canadian Scottish secured the right flank. A company of British Royal Marine Commandos secured the left flank. The first wave of Canadian infantry was brought into shore by LCAs, landing at 07:55. When the ramps lowered, the troops disembarked and waded ashore. The soldiers hit the beaches and began the deadliest run of their lives. As they worked their way through the obstacles and minefields, they came into the killing zones of the German gun positions. So here is a map of the North Shores and Queen's Own Rifles, 3rd Canadian Infantry Division landing at St. Aubin, Saumur, and Bernier-Saumur on Juno Beach, Nan Beach Red. There's the North Shore, B Company and A Company. Queen's Own Rifles, B Company and A Company. St. Aubin, Saumur, and Bernier-Saumur. German forces and defenses. The 716th Infantry Division area, June 6, 1944. You can see here the 716th German forces and defenses. Here, and here. You can see numerous positions where they are, and here is where, of course, our units have to come in. And this here is Caen, which they need to take. So the maps are as follows. Of course, you have the 50th British Infantry Division from Gold, and they have to push down here and through to the left, to near to the Breos area. You have the German 726th Regiment, and then you have the 915th Regiment, and then of course Canadians. We have to deal with the 716th Infantry Division, but also the 7th, which is connected to, of course, which a unit of the 736th Regiment is part of. You have the Canadian 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, and so there's Saumur, Saumur, 7th Brigade, as I would talk to, and they have to take Crowley, and that is the 9th Infantry Brigade, 7th Infantry Brigade, and 8th Infantry Brigade, which is 8th Infantry Brigade is North Shore. So that's where we were here. That's where our guys were from New Brunswick here. 8th Brigade going in. So Telville, Devers, Benissimo, and they're pushing in here to Caen. And the Germans are, of course, going to try to get their 71st Pan 70 sorry 21st Panzer Division and through. You can see German gun positions here and along the coast. Third British Infantry Division, Ostersheim, and Orne River is what we talked about, which is here, and then you have our paratroopers, Canadian and British paratroopers here along this section. Um, British 6th Airborne Division, including the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion. They were here and they pushed in through Ronville. 21st Panzer Division through here and here, trying to push them back. So here you see with the parachute airborne landing and dropping sites. These here, the arrows, these are German counterattacks, and that's where they were coming in through. Glider landings, and that's including British paratrooper and glider landings here. And we have you can see the cross of Canadian Cemetery, so Benny-Suma right here. That's Canadians. That's where they will be. There'll be a lot of people going there, families and veterans who served going there as well as Canada House tomorrow. Flooded areas here. You can see here flooded areas through, and this is where it is adjacent to France and England. General Eisenhower was overall in command. So General Eisenhower's order of the day: soldiers, sailors, airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which you have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940, 1941. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck. Let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Signed, Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Now that is the famous speech given to soldiers as they are about to embark upon D-Day landings that morning. General Montgomery is, of course, deputy is in charge of the 21st, in charge of British operations, and then, of course, General Dempsey in charge of the Canadians, of us. So, 3rd Infantry Division, 30C, and 50D, 2nd Armored, and then, of course, General Bradley, 1st Armored. Or Second Army rather. So you have the First Army under General Bradley, Second Army. Sorry, I always think of armored when I say the AR. So this is the First Army and Second Army, and you see this in entire group of men altogether, the 150,000. The Americans, Utah and Omaha, British gold and sword, And of course, for Canada, Juno. And so here's where you can see where we had also gone through and to seal the Feliz Gap. So Caen was finally taken around 18th to the 20th of July. I mean, you look at the surrounding the towns, Caen, Bayeux, and Carentan were not captured by the Allies on D-Day at all, of course, right? So for the first week of the invasion, the Allies concentrated on linking the beachheads. I mean, the British and Canadian forces resumed their attacks in the vicinity of Caen, and the suburbs and city center north of the Orne were captured during Operation Charnwood, and that's the 8th and the 9th of July. But it wasn't taken by the second until the second Canadian Corps um, until they didn't take Caen until 18th to the 20th of July during Operation Atlantic. This here is the Canadian. It is the Canadian famous, of course, what they call the Canadian House or Canada House. Um, it is here that the famous Canadian House can be found. A testament to the fighting on D-Day, this house featured in many film clips and photos taken of the D-Day landings on June 6th. It stands which as it did on the morning of June 6, 1944. Only the bullet holes evidence in the many pictures having been repaired. 200 meters east lies the German strong point, in front of which the assault battalion of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada came ashore that morning, and while so many of their number in subduing, it too bears the scars of the morning's fighting, and one of the bunkers still has an Allied 37 millimeter cannon shell that was fired at it embedded in its concrete walls. The concrete paving slabs lined the road nearby, showing where the Canadian tanks advanced inland. The tank tracks gouging out their mark, however, on the paved stones lining the road. And that is still there today. They still have that there today. You're going to see, I mean, if you've seen on, even on CBC, they had an article. Um, there's these you can find on the beach. There these weird metal sticks. These aren't metal sticks per se. They're what they are is spent cordite from shells and from yeah, artillery and coming down and munitions. So that's spent cordite pieces, and that's quite something indeed. Um, in the on the pavement and in the pavement going into town, you can see where the tanks have dug in. Their tracks have dug into the concrete, and they wanted to keep that there as a testament to history. So these are Canadian soldiers digging in on Juno. The Germans used millions of slave laborers during 4 years of occupation to construct the Atlantic Wall, a modern fortification system along the coast of France. The fortifications consisted of a series of reinforced concrete gun emplacements supported by well-protected infantry strongpoints and heavy machine gun nests overlooking the beaches. These were surrounded by trenches with mortars and machine guns. The beaches were strewn with obstacles and mines. So the tetrado obstacles, three iron bars intersecting at right angles, and been constructed on the beaches. So there's iron bars, there's different tree trunks that are basically put into place to try to stop tanks. Um, there's, oh yeah, a lot of stuff there. Fields of barbed wire and mines covered the land past the beaches. Also, the seafront houses provided excellent observation and firing positions for snipers, such as Canada House. There were 32 static infantry divisions of widely varying quality defending these fortifications along the French and Dutch coast. A lot. You can see the obstacles. This first line of defense was backed up by panzer divisions, such as the 21st, armored and motorized divisions positioned inland from the Atlantic Wall. Strategy was that if the Atlantic Wall were breached, these elite formations of crack mobile troops would strike as soon as possible after the landing and threw the Canadians and the Allies back into the sea. Striking distance of the coast were five first class divisions: the 21st Panzer Division with an estimated 350 tanks, the 12th SS with 150 tanks, which I believe was Kurt Meyer's unit, which was he was responsible for killing Canadians execution. Um, the Panzer Lehr Division of the Le Mans area, and two more tank divisions in the in the Sinai. Um, the proximity the proximity of the 12th SS and 21st Panzer divisions made it difficult for the British and Canadians to capture their objectives of Caen on D-Day. So the coastal defenses along Juno Beach were defended by three battalions of the 716th Infantry Division with a strength of 7,771 soldiers of all ranks. So that's the 716th. The 12th SS Division, positioned 50 miles behind the coast, had 20,540 men and a full establishment of 150 tanks. The 12th SS were a fanatical Hitler Youth formation raised to believe in the German master race and the Führer. Of course, it's where Kurt Meyer comes in. Two-thirds of these soldiers were 18 years of age and had received sophisticated battle training starting at the age of 16. So more Canadian troops landing from Library and Archives Canada. This is Major General R.F.L. Keller. There's the commander of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division in Normandy on D-Day, June 6th. And that's coming from Frank L. Duberville, National Archives Canada. So you can see here Carcelets de Mar, Bernays de Mar, and Saint-Aubin de Mar, sur Mar. Carcelets de Mar, Bernays de Mar, and Saint-Aubin de Mar, and Grays de Mar. The sector assigned to the Canadians was codenamed Juno. Stretching along 5 miles of sandy beaches, Juno Beach included the three small resort towns of Courcelles-sur-Mer, Bernay-sur-Mer, and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer. Waiting for them were men of the German 716th Infantry Division. And the 716th is, of course, where a lot of fighting for Canadians had happened here. They had erected thousands of obstacles, belts of thick barbed wire, and dozens of minefields. Steel reinforced concrete bunkers brimmed with anti tank guns, machine guns, and riflemen overlooked the beaches. Mortars and artillery were pre-sighted on the landing grounds. They were determined to prevent the Allies gaining a foothold in France, which failed. So see here, you can look at where Juno Beach and Nan. So Nan Beach, which is here, is where the North Shore were. And so they were fighting the 716th. You can take a look at the different areas where it is in conjunction with all the other beaches that are British, and the Americans are down onto the left. Here's Gold, and this is Juno, and then here's more Sword, where the Brits are again as well. And these are planned Allied paradrop zones here and here. X and K. German resistance, you can see, was all along this line. And main lines around Caen, Corrales, Bayeux. numerous other positions. So this is Sword Beach, and here's Juno. So, and this is in French, but you can see here where our units are going, and that the British units are pressing in, um, and paratroopers here, here, and you have uh, the the 21st Panzer Division and 12th coming in through here. But then you also, for Juno in this area here, you have the 716th here and coming in to lay possible counterattack. So again, just another map of where Caen is in comparison to where the sea is and where the North Shore, Queen's Own, and Regina and Winnipeg rifles and the CO, the Canadian Scots landing here. And this became the HQ for Third Division. And then as they pressed in forward, and we got far enough here. We actually the Regina rifles and um, the Third Canadian Division pushed further than a lot of Allied forces did than the rest of that day, because they were the North Shore. Um, Kept fighting all the way to Carpercourt and then Carpercourt Airfield. And that's where they, and there's the book by Mark Milner that explains this. So this is where they are from D-Day and all the way to Carpercourt. So Operation Windsor is what they call, and that's what a lot of what Mark Miller's book talks about is from, of course, which operated. The operation was the 4th and 5th of July in 1944. The Canadian attack during the Battle of Normandy, which was undertaken by, of course, the North Shore Regiment, but the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. And Carpequet and the adjacent airfield were the targets, and hopefully to take that ground. And that was defended by Kurt Mayer's units and the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Jugend Panzer Group West. The attack was originally intended to take place during the later stages of Operation Ipsum to protect the eastern flank of the main assault. It was postponed for a week, but it was finally captured on the 9th of July. So that book, which I've ordered for the museum, goes from June 6th to July 9th, 1944. Um, there was counterattacks, and of course on July 4th, the 8th Canadian Infantry Brigade and attached battalion of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division attacked Carperquet, sorry, supported on the flanks by the 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade. The village was captured by mid-afternoon, but German resistance in the south defeated 2 attacks on the airfield. Despite significant Allied tank and air support, the next day the Canadians repulsed German counterattacks and held the village, which served as a base operation for Operation Charnwood, a second attack on Caen, involving the rest of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division on July 8th. And the airfield was captured by the Canadians on 9th of July, and that's including with the North Shore Regiment. The naval bombardment and bombing by the Allied air forces failed to have the destructive effect on the German beach defenses hoped for, and in many places Allied infantry engineers and tanks had to fight their way forward against German 75 mm guns and bigger guns, 88s, that were fortified in these bunkers. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division landed on Juno with the Canadian Infantry Brigade attack on Berniers and Saint-Aubin-sur-Marne, and they met determined German resistance. And the 9th Canadian Infantry Brigade followed on as the tide rose higher and faster than usual, which narrowed the beach, making traffic jams at the beach exits much worse. On the left of the Canadians, the 8th Infantry Brigade came ashore on Sword with the 1st Special Service Brigade on its left northern flank to join the 6th Airborne Division at the Orne crossings. So Operation Perch was a British offensive of the Second World War, which took place from the 7th and the 14th June 1944. During the early stages of the Battle of Normandy, the operation was intended to encircle and seize the German-occupied city of Caen, which was a D-Day objective for the British 3rd Infantry Division in the early phases of Operation Overlord, of course, which is Normandy. Operation Perch was to begin immediately after the British beach landings with an advance to the southeast of Caen, and that was by the 30th Corps. 3 days after the invasion, the city was still in German hands, and the operation was amended. The operation was expanded to include I Corps for pincer attack on Caen. So here you have Centaurian Centaur 4. These are basically a good medium tank. Um, English military engineers that developed the concept of the cruiser tank, and this is what it is. It's an armored vehicle whose role is to support its infantry fires and progress at its own pace. And so, being able to oppose a counter-offensive armored vehicle using the chassis of the A-24 Chevalier tank, they equip it in 1942 with a 95 millimeter howitzer in order to endow the British Royal Marines with an additional asset during the Normandy landings, and that's what they use this for. This is the Centaur 4 tank of the Royal Marines. This is armored support group near Tilly-sur-Sauceuse, and that's June 13th, 1944. So they only had produced roughly about 80 of these, and their weight is like over 28,000 kilograms. Um, they can go roughly 48 kilometers an hour, not very fast, but these they're armed with two Bessa machine guns. They've got a 395 horsepower engine. They've got a crew of five, so commander, gunner, loader, radio operator, driver, and front gunner. And the front armor is 76 millimeter, but the rear armor is only 20 millimeters. So it's basically it's a front surge tank. It's an assault tank or a cruiser tank, what we'd call. Um, these are the Brits had been pretty good at developing these with a 95 millimeter gun. These tanks are actually they're using the Battle of Normandy, but they're starting to be replaced after the Battle of Normandy by the Mark IV Churchill tanks. So the Churchills are bigger and they're a bit more powerful, and Sherman tanks. The armor is much better on the Churchill tanks. I mean, if you look at the front armor, it's 152 millimeters. Um, so it is more, so you can see much better frontal armor. The gun it's a QF 75 millimeter 6 pounder gun, what they call Mark III, and those are pretty. It's still a pretty good gun, even though it's not directly as big. It's got it's a longer barrel and it's can shoot further. They're slower, but they're heavier and they're more protected. That's the Churchill Mark IV. So you can see here a Churchill tank of the 7th Royal Tank Regiment, 31st Tank Brigade, supporting infantry of the 8th Royal Scots during Operation Epsom on 20th of June 1944. So Operation Epsom, also known as the First Battle of the Dawn, um, was a British offensive in the Second World War between 26th and the 30th of June 44 during Battle of Normandy. The offensive was intended to outflank and seize the German-occupied city of Caen, an important Allied objective in the early stages of the Operation Overlord. And so this is one of the famous pictures that was taken. So the vast majority of the men of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division um, Brits had some. Certainly, some British soldiers had some, but the vast majority of the guys like the North Shore and the Queen's Own, a lot of those guys and the Regina Rifles, they would go ashore at Juno Beach. And they had no combat experience. They had training, but they had no combat experience. So, like Fred Moore, a lieutenant with the New Brunswick's North Shore, they said they had been training hard in Scotland and England for more than a year. We had no idea what we were getting into, he said, but we were ready for anything, and we considered ourselves the best. And so that's, optimistic as they were, they didn't know what they were getting into. Um, Ernest Adolphe Cote was a prominent member the CAT at the time, or the Canadian Army. A lieutenant colonel of the Third Canadian Infantry Division, he was responsible for the logistics and provision of supplies for a division of about 15,000 men, and reported to the commanding officer regarding the preparation and execution of administrative plans in support of military operations. He was among a select few officers who were informed of the date and location of the D-Day invasion, and was put in charge of planning the logistics for his division in secrecy. And so he had a lot of men and a lot of secrets that were depending on him to keep them a secret and to keep these units ready with enough supplies and equipment. Total German casualties killed and wounded in the Normandy campaign were estimated at more than 200,000, while the Allies suffered 209,000 casualties among the more than 2 million soldiers landed in France since D-Day. Among the Allied casualties were more than 18,700 Canadian casualties. Over 5,000 Canadian soldiers were killed, numerous ones from every regiment, including North Shore. On the afternoon and evening of June 7th, 1944, at the headquarters of SS Commandant Kurt Meyer at the Abbaye Ardennes, certain Canadian prisoners of war were executed by their SS captors in a series of killings that would, by the time they stopped at the end of June, have claimed the lives of at least 139 Canadian and British POWs in SS captivity. These young Nazi soldiers ensured that the name of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, would always be associated with the brutality of the regime they so loyally followed. Canadian prisoners taken early in the Battle of Normandy. The film still from a German newsreel dated 14th of June 1944. So here you can see some of our the main weapons that were used throughout the Second World War. In the later war period, this is what the standard soldier would carry in the North Shore Regiment, as well as most soldiers, except that they were machine gunners. They'd have the Mark II Bren guns and so forth. The Canadian infantry used the Lee Enfield rifle as their standard weapon throughout World War II, whether it be the Mark III or Mark IV. The short magazine Lee Enfield number 1 was used up until 1942. Then when the number 4 was issued, so the number 1 Mark III, and that was the one that was issued early. It was used up until 1942, and then in June 1943, the Canadians started using the number 4s made in Canada, designated the Mark 1. Mark 1, number 4 Mark 1. Its box-type magazine extended through the bottom of the stock. Forward of the trigger guard carried 2 5-round clips at 303. The Lee Enfield was the fastest operating bolt-action rifle in the world. A trained rifleman could fire between 15 to 30 aimed rounds a minute and be effective up to 900 yards. The ranges of up to 600 yards were more common. Various sights could be fitted and could also launch a grenade from a cup adapter or a discharger. So a rifle grenade, what they call. Um, it's the early grenade launcher. A superior locking system and easy field maintenance made the Lee Enfield superior to most other bolt-action rifles. And Canadian manufactured Lee Enfields, there are almost a million of them that were produced um, during the war. The Vickers machine guns. Now these were used in the First World War and Second World War. Um, there's an interesting number that I've read that's from Vickers MG online. Um, there is a list of exactly how many that were used in during D-Day. Um, it looks to me like the British had 60 that landed on D-Day of these. The Canadians, we had 44 of them. Um, and the actually so the Brits on Gold had 60 of them. On Juno Beach, we had 44 of them, and the Brits had 48 of them on Sword Beach. And of course, these were used, Gold, Sword, and Juno. The Americans had their own, of course, Mark 1919s and whatnot that were used on D-Day. They had numerous versions of their own as well. Other Allied forces used around another 36 of them. So these are machine gun squads. So there's numbers of these that were used, and that's how many had gone and landed on D-Day. And Vickers 303, these are awesome. They were used in both wars, as I mentioned. Class as a medium weapon. The Vickers gun could be fired at high or low angles from a tripod. It operates on a simple gas-assisted recoil system, and it was water-cooled. The Vickers was fed by 250 round cloth belts of 303 ammunition and fired in fully automatic bursts of 10 to 20 rounds. It could fire 60 shots per minute, rated as slow fire, and it was, and 250 as rapid fire. It was accurate up to 1,100 yards, but could reach much further. With 303, absolutely. Another system that we had in the Second World War, British and Canadian and Commonwealth, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, or PIAT. The 32 pound PIAT was a cross between an anti-tank rifle and a bazooka. It fired a 2.5 pound anti-tank grenade up to 100 yards. The PIAT was effective against all German tanks if fired accurately at the side armor. It was simple in design, construction, and operation, but it had considerable recoil. So you had to, the stand here, and you put if you could put the butt to your shoulder or to ground, it would be better to have it on the ground, I would think. But the recoil is quite substantial. And that's the PIAT in operation here, so you can put it against your shoulder, and as long as it's got a connection with the ground, it should be good. And here's the Bren Mark II. I built a Model 1 of these. These Bren guns, I tell you, they were good. I mean, they're light machine gun, one man operated or two man operated machine gun, uh, built in the 1930s, but used in various roles even up to until 1992. But it's a primary light machine gun in the Second World War. Also used in Korea. Um, these were used. Amazingly, these were designed in Czechoslovakia and then reused and basically built in the United Kingdom and manufactured in the 1930s up until in service up until the 90s. But they rechambered them to 7.62 times 51 NATO. Um, Over 500,000 of these were built. Mark 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and L4s. Um, these had roughly barrel length 25 inch. It's a two-man operated system, really. So you have a gunner and an assistant that would carry other mags, because the magazines up top, what you see here, are 20 rounds. So you'd take the other one out, and he'd put another one in, and then you'd keep firing. It's 303 British is standard, but they've got, the Bulgarians at the 8 millimeter, and then of course they have the 7.92 Mausers for China in the Second World War, and L4 series were NATO. And then they have 7.62-39 for China after the Second World War. But their fire rate is roughly about 520 rounds a minute. Um, Sustained practically, it's 120 rounds a minute sustained, replacing the mags each way. Maximum range is, 1,850 yards. Effective range is roughly 600. An awesome system. Very historic. These are the Stenmark twos. Now these here, they don't come with a real good safety. I mean, if fling it over your shoulder, it could actually blow a soldier's head off. These, sometimes were used for clearing rooms. They're extremely um, good for clearing rooms. If you chamber it and you throw it in and you don't have any grenades, it will kill everybody in the room, as used by the Brits and the Canadians. The Sten is it's a British submachine gun, just basically very simply built, cheaply built, with a bunch of tubes and sheet steel, and it's chambered in 9.19 parabellum. It's a 9 millimeter submachine gun. Um, these here are they were used from 1941 up until some countries even use them up until the 60s and others. But the Sten is something that is really famous and famously unreliable. Sten is essentially it's produced in 1941 onward, but they had over 4.6 million of all variants produced. There's one Mark ones, two S, three, four, five, and six. And so the Parabellum, um, with the Parabellum round, these carried 32 round box magazines, which you see on the side here. And that's a standard one you'd see in the Second World War is Mark II. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Aaron Boma, military historian for Carleton County, military specialist for Carleton County, and owner operator Carleton County Military Museum. Thank you very much.